You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Hello, Mike White and Projection Booth podcast listeners. This is Mark Begley, the host of Wake Up Heavy, and it looks like it's time for another Ego Fest. In lieu of questions, this time I am sending in my heartfelt congratulations on 500 episodes of the best movie podcast around, as well as offering up a huge thank you. Thank you for the show. It is a film lover's dream. Thank you for all the time and energy you put into the show. And thank you for being a ridiculously generous person, not only with your show, but with so many other people's shows. For me personally, thank you for guesting on 4 episodes now. Thank you for having me on as a guest. Thank you for always being open to answering questions. And for the editing tutorials that you often present. If anyone is interested in seeing the nuts and bolts of the show, I strongly suggest that you sit in on an editing session. Mike posts when he does that on social media, and it is very helpful. So if you have your own podcast, definitely take a look at how Mike puts one together. So congrats on 500. Here's to 500, 1,000, or 1,500 more, and thank you for all that you do for the film community.
Welcome to Ego Fest 10. It is once again that time of year where I kick back and just talk about things related to the projection booth, the show itself. First off, I want to thank Mark Begley for that opener. Mark runs a fantastic podcast called Wake Up Heavy. If you haven't heard it, I definitely recommend that you check it out. We have some special guests in this episode. We have some news. So let me go ahead and I'll start with a little bit of news. Some of you have written and said, hey, what happened to the podcast on Spotify? Well, I'll tell you what. The RIAA, which is in charge of making sure that things, music in particular, are not bootlegged. Well, they got in touch with me, a couple months ago and said, hey, there's a couple podcasts where you have songs on here and you need to pull these songs off or pull the podcast down. I didn't necessarily think that it was a real threat. I thought, okay, well, they'll pull them down or whatever, because it was also Spotify was on the CC. So I'm like, okay, cool, Spotify can handle this. No, I had to take them down. So I took those down. It was like, I think maybe like a Freep thing from years ago, Freep Film Fest. And there was a music mix, which I said, yeah, sure, I'll take those down. Got back with the RIAA and said, okay, these are all set. Please, reinstate my podcast. I think I've sent 24 maybe emails to them saying, okay, I'm all set. Please reinstate my podcast. Nope, I haven't heard a fucking word. I am off Spotify for now, just so you know. But there are many other places where you can get the podcast. I recommend possibly iTunes or Stitcher, or even just going to Spreaker itself. And yeah, you can always get the podcast via the website, projectionboothpodcast.com. Though I know for me, I like to subscribe to things. I use an app called Beyond Pod. That's for, I'm not sure if it's for iPhones or not, but it definitely is for Android phones. And I bought the license years and years ago and haven't had any issues with it, knock wood. I also wanted to take a few minutes here just to talk about a recent loss that the podcasting book film community has had, which was Mike McBeardo McPadden. McBeardo had been on a few episodes of the show. His books have informed a lot of things that we've done over the years. McBeardo was first on the Black Roses episode. I did a special episode talking about one of his other books, which is Teen Movie Hell. He also did the Heavy Metal Movies book, which is fantastic. As part of the Teen Movie Hell book, we also had him on as one of the co-hosts on the Better Off Dead / One Crazy Summer episode. Mike was always really generous with his time, very nice with me. I am just surprised that he's gone. It was very sudden. No one expected it. And I feel bad for him and his family. So there is a fundraiser going on right now for him. I'm not saying that you have to give anything. If you can, do it. It's one way of showing support for his family. Even just kind words and memories are another way of showing your support. So I will include a link to that GoFundMe in the show notes over at projectionboothpodcast.com. For the folks who are Patreon subscribers, I want to thank you always. Usually you get a little bit of a bonus episode to say, here's what's coming the next month. Well, this one's going out to everybody because everyone can listen to this Ego Fest. Coming up in January on the show, it is musical month. Never have done this theme before. We've done a lot of musicals before, but I've never actually dedicated an entire month just to musicals. And there are 4 very different kinds of musicals. We're going to start off with Evita. Then we're moving on to Hair, the Milos Forman film, The Blues Brothers, and we're rounding it out with Duets, the Bruce Paltrow film. If you haven't seen those, check them out now so then you won't be so unfamiliar when the episodes drop in January. Also, we're going to have 1, maybe 2 bonus episodes in January. We are hoping for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, basically the whole Bill and Ted franchise, as well as Alien Resurrection. That's Alien 4 if you go by the SADAC rules. And then just a word of warning, February has no theme. It is a complete grab bag of weird stuff. Some people try to figure out themes in what I'm doing, like when it comes to watch parties on Friday nights. There's no theme to this. And speaking of watch parties, we are continuing watch parties in 2021. I am working from home until at least March, maybe April. Some Friday nights I am putting on the watch party. I will try to warn folks in advance. Also, you can go to the invite that is out there on Facebook. I will paste a link in the show notes for this episode. Check it out. I think there's a couple times in January where we are recording on a Friday night, mostly to accommodate like Australian schedules. So won't be doing watch parties on those nights. I also did really want to hit this Saturday, December 26th. This is a tradition for my friends and I. Every December 26th, we try to get together and watch Black Shampoo. Things are a little different these days because of COVID, so we're going to do a watch party on the 26th, and everyone is invited to that. If you haven't seen Black Shampoo, now is the time to do it. It'll be at 8 o'clock Saturday, December 26th. That's 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm not going to figure it out for the rest of the world. I probably will have other things that come up after that are kind of related to favorite films that we used to watch when I was in high school. So possibly Disco Godfather, Orgy of the Dead, things like that. So should be some good stuff. And you can get to that through tinyurl.com/projectionboothcast. That's KAST party. And you just need to download the Cast app on your phone. Hopefully you're not watching on your phone. On your computer, there's no Roku tie-in, unfortunately. So it's mostly computer-based. So let's go ahead and we're going to play the first of 2 special segments that we have for this Ego Fest. Coming up right now is Mr. Rob St. Mary, who is going to read the reader mail, ask some questions from that, as well as some questions of his own.
I'm excited to be in here and get a chance to talk to you. I mean, it has been a while. I think I was only on, one episode this year?
I think you're right. Are you on more next year?
I'm on a couple.
Okay, good.
You were kind enough to put the list up, and I said, yeah, I'll take Under the Flag of the Rising Sun.
Which was a suggestion you placed 3 years ago, probably, or 4.
I'm going to make a case for that film, and if people are listening now, you just go ahead and watch it, and then you can join us when we're going to do it sometime in 2021. I think it's in the spring. One of the things about, and I definitely think this is definitely an American thing, or European thing, is that we get so many World War II films from the perspective of Germany. And granted, Nazis, great fucking evil bastards, so you can understand why that's the case.
I will not have you talk about my president that way.
I was trying not to go there. But the thing is that we get so many World War II films of Europe. And we don't get enough from the perspective of the Pacific. Now, there are a few that are really good, like I like Thin Red Line. I think Malick did a fantastic job on that. I liked the 2 films that Clint Eastwood did. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to talk about those when we do Under the Flag of the Rising Sun, Letters from Iwo Jima, and Flags of Our Fathers. But we don't really get a lot of the Pacific theater. And as the grandson of a wounded World War II vet who fought in the Pacific, I've always had a hunger to understand the Japanese perspective. And I think that that's why Under the Flag of the Rising Sun and also Clint Eastwood's Letters from Iwo Jima are really fascinating films, because they give us that. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. I'm looking forward to talking about, I think, end of the year, around this time next year, 2021, Fight Club. And, oh yes, the world's slowest reader has read that book. Not only that, I've read the comic book sequel. I just bought the 3rd comic book sequel, and I own a copy of the prequel on vinyl. Now, most people do not know that there is a Fight Club prequel.
I didn't know about it until right now.
So we'll be talking about that. The one that I'm working my way through, I just shut it off, but I'm going to come back to it over the holiday break here, is Southland Tales. And I signed up for that one sight unseen. I've never seen that movie. I watched, I think, half of one of the versions. Wow. That's all I can say. So that is going to be a conversation to be sure. But I'm glad that I get to triple the amount of times that I've been on the show next year. I think part of it, to be honest, and I know I'm talking a lot right now, is I've just been busy.
Words too fucking busy shouldn't be in a waitress's vocabulary.
Wanted to make sure I could dedicate the time and attention that you so rightly require when it comes to being on this show. I mean, the people who come on, who co-host, who do the work to be on the show with you each and every week, it's no joke. I mean, this isn't just a bunch of guys sitting around drinking beer and talking about, that was cool, man. Yeah. It's like, no, this is the real deal, man. And you got to bring your A game. So I knew that I couldn't do that over the last several years, even though I know that every so often I'll get a message from someone who goes, man, when are you going to be back on with Mike? I miss hearing you. And, I miss playing the Bunwell drinking game. So it is what it is.
Yeah, it was so nice. Did an episode with Jedediah Ayers, and it was the To Live and Die in L.A. episode. He was like, oh, well, I watched this movie and this movie and this movie and this movie. And I was just like, holy cow. I'm like, you're putting me to shame. He goes, what else do I have to do? You do this every week. He was like preparing for months ahead of time. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's really nice. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for actually being considerate of like, yes, I do this every week. And I'm like scrambling. So he's like doing the right thing. He's pacing himself out. He's reading the books. He's watching the movies and comes to the show even more prepared than I was.
I don't know if you want to call anybody out, but I remember before, I think it was during my time as your thoroughly ensconced co-host over those many years, there was someone who came on the show and you were just like, I remember afterward you were like, never again. I will never have that person as a co-host on this. Like, I don't even know if they watched the movie. It just seems like it was a complete waste of time having that person on. And I was like, damn straight.
Well, right now, my never again list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. So,
wow.
There is a Hall of Shame. If people are interested, I will not read out the Hall of Shame, but there is a Hall of Shame where I just say, never again. I will not work with this person ever again.
The thing that's amazing to me, and this was part of the reason why I slid into your, little email and said, hey, so you got an Ego Fest coming up. Would it be okay if I came on and asked you a few questions and, maybe I can read the viewer mail or listener mail, I guess. I just wanted an opportunity to chat with you, but also I really kind of wanted to focus on the fact, are we there yet, or is it coming up in 2021 that it's 10 years?
10 years in March of 2021, but 500 episodes at the end of 2020.
Those don't even include the special episodes, right?
No, and we do a lot of those. And it's always funny because I think the special episodes tend to actually get more listeners than the regularly scheduled ones, because the special episodes usually end up being like the more popular mainstream titles, like this year Commando and Jaws. And of course, we had a lot of listeners for those, as opposed to Crumbs or Seeds of Man, just like stuff that nobody's ever heard of. We've heard of Jaws, and they want to listen to episodes about Jaws.
That is the effort of any, I don't care if it's a publishing house, a record label, to balance the things you love versus the things you know that will sell. And speaking of selling, are we going to get cut right in the middle of this conversation right now by a Starbucks ad? I am impressed, my man, because when I came on originally at the end of 2011, wow, almost 10 years ago, to do Bloodsucking Freaks, my first episode with you, that fine holiday film, it was like free ads galore. It was like, yeah, we'll talk about your podcast and we'll put your little podcast promos on there. And maybe if you want to give us a couple of bucks, go over to the Adam and Eve and buy yourself some marital aids and use our code. And that was about it. And you said you made a whole 35 cents for a long time. So you must be rolling in the dough.
Oh my God, yes. So much money. No. No. I'm lucky if I make $500 a month from this stuff.
And for the amount of time you put into it?
Just 39 cents. That's less than a small cup of coffee.
Could never pay my bills, unfortunately. I was very surprised. I posted on Twitter a few weeks ago. I was just like, man, I wish I could just do this as a full-time job. And then somebody wrote back, they're like, it isn't your full-time job? You do another job on top of this? I was like, yeah, I work 40 hours a week and like a real job type job. This is just a hobby. If I could make enough money, I would do it full-time. That would be fantastic.
One of the things I wanted to ask you when it comes to this, when you look over this 10 years for you, these, 500 episodes and whatnot, I mean, you've climbed so many mountains.
Why is he climbing a mountain?
Gone so many places with the show. What do you want next? What do you want to do next with the show? What is it for you? What still makes it interesting after 10 years?
The conversations make it the most interesting. I mean, especially this year. 2020 has just been such a shit year, but thank God for having the podcast, because I've been able to connect with people still. The interviewees, the co-hosts, having that connection and having that outlet has just been invaluable. Being able to have conversations about stuff that I love, being able to watch movies that I've never seen before, and then being able to have semi-intelligent conversations about those. That's really what I enjoy the most. As far as what I want to do next, I mean, I say it at the end of almost every episode, global domination is my end game, and I don't think people take me seriously enough about that.
What exactly would that look like?
On the back of your wrist, I would like to have maybe a tattoo or a barcode or something, and you wouldn't be able to trade goods unless you had that.
Sounds fine.
I would like more people to listen to the show. That would probably be the thing that I would like. And I would like every once in a while when people write, like, here are the best movie podcasts you should be listening to. I wouldn't mind to mention every once in a while. That would be pretty cool.
I wanted to ask you if you hold any ill will against me related to this show because the show's unwieldy length of time of the shows are actually kind of partly my fault. The original concept of the show was an hour. It was 59 minutes. And I remember you were like, right, it's got to be 59 minutes. Any of these interviews or whatever, they'll all just be extras. And I came on and I was like, whoa. Like, I work in radio and everything has to be formatted and all that stuff. And I'm like, there's so many good things that I've had to like put on the cutting room floor. How about we take the Fight Club attitude to this? And you were like, what's the Fight Club attitude? And I said,
fights will go on as long as they have to.
The podcast goes on as long as it has to. That's how you end up with a 7-hour Conan episode. So is it my fault that you are now the king of the really long podcast? Did you like doing the hour-long version? Would you rather do the hour-long version? Or do you really like the longer version because I was the one who opened his big mouth and said, let's just do it that way?
I love not being beholden to a specific time period. And I love the idea of, again, having those conversations and not having to kill parts of them. Of course, I still go through and I edit like crazy, and I edit out my horrible jokes that I make all the time. I will edit out my horsey laugh and any sort of like weird digressions that we get into. And then when it comes to like interview subjects, sometimes, I'll ask them about things that aren't necessarily pertinent to the movie that we're talking about, but folks are giving me their time, and I find so many of these stories just inherently fascinating. Tell me the story of when Lenny Bruce went to the comedy club and said, boy, that Vaughn Meter's career is fucked now after the Kennedy assassination. That's great. I want to hear those stories. I don't care if they're not pertinent to the discussion at hand, but give me that color commentary. And if anything, I'm hoping one of these days somebody might actually be interested in some of the stuff that we talk about and be able to go, oh, there's like a whole treasure trove of things here, and so many things that aren't necessarily 100% related to the movie, but there's more information here, stuff that might actually prove valuable to somebody else someday.
And that is what I tried to do in my radio career. The one thing I learned, sadly, is, I worked at a series of radio stations. I'm no longer employed in radio anymore. But I learned very early on that I had to keep my own archive because most of the places that I worked did not. I think that there's a lot of media orgs that sort of feel like, the New York Times or here in Detroit, the Free Press, they're the media of record. So there's really no point in us keeping our interviews or stories or anything like that. They're ephemeral. They're made to be, they're basically popcorn. You just kind of move on. It's not a meal. It's light entertainment. And I never really took that approach. I always wanted the approach that the interviews I did, the stories I did, the things that I did were very much a snapshot, not only of the time in which they were created, but also probably where I was mentally at the time as well. Like, what were the things I was interested in? Why was I interested in those things? What were these people who I was talking to? What were they doing? So I 100% agree with you, and I'm glad that you have this massive treasure trove of episodes. 500 episodes. I don't know if you've done the math. That's got to be, are you at 10,000 hours? The old, the
old Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
And it's me. It's the Beatles. I don't think I'm at 10,000. Well, I'm probably at 10,000 hours as far as working on it. But as far as like actual output of things, Spreaker used to keep really prominent a number that would say you are at this number of hours of content. I don't think that they do that anymore. Last time I remember looking, it was like 1,700 hours, and that was a few months ago. So it's definitely gone up since then.
Okay, well, maybe we can get you a 10-hour episode on, something and help boost those numbers. What do you think?
I'm sure my Empire Strikes Back episode is going to be somewhere around there. 768 episodes of the Projection Booth. That doesn't include the other podcasts that I've done or the guest spots or anything. But yeah, that's just the Projection Booth. And that also includes like a couple smaller things, some bonuses here and there. But then, also some special episodes that are just ginormous.
And they're all being stored on one hard drive.
And it's right next to this large magnet.
I'm lucky, and I wanted to tell you this because I don't know if I did tell you this, I think listeners would be interested in this, is that all of the episodes that I was on, all the episodes that either I was a co-host on or I edited to date, I believe I have copies of all of those. There might be a few I got to check with you to get. But all of that stuff, thank you, Hal.
Oh, I miss hearing Holly while we're podcasting.
But all of those episodes have been included into my work that I did when I was in radio, and it all has been sent to your alma mater, the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and is being stored at the Bentley Historical Library.
That belongs in a museum.
Now, the Bentley Historical Library, for those who aren't hip to know what that is at the University of Michigan, this is the place that holds all the governor's papers going back to the 1830s. They have a massive collection of the underground press of the 1960s. And they actually have all of the newspapers, the Free Press, the News, even the Detroit Times, which has been defunct since the 1960s. They have copies of all of that, as well as other notable people throughout history. And then they decided, well, we would like to collect your materials as well. So all the Projection Booth episodes that I'm on will be there. I would like to offer to you, and see if you're interested, to make that connection for you and see if maybe you would like to have your materials stored there in totality.
Oh, sure.
Oh, okay.
That sounds great.
Within the University of Michigan archive system, although a different library, there's a lot of great stuff. Remember, there was, we went over there to look at, what was it, Robert Altman's stuff? Orson Welles?
Orson Welles, yep. And yeah, I've looked at Altman's stuff. It's fantastic. Yeah, we went there and we were, that's where we recorded our...
Secret Honor?
Secret Honor, yeah.
I will make that connection for you between the archivist there and you, and then that way you won't have to worry about that hard drive stored next to the magnet. It will be handled by legit archivists who have been handling very precious materials for a long time. How our stuff got there, we'll never quite understand that, but at least it's in there with everything else.
We have top men working on it right now. Who? Top men.
I just want to say to you, congrats, sir.
Well, thank you. I couldn't have gotten here without you, though, or any of the other folks that have been co-hosts throughout the years. You know, everybody's committed so much time and so much effort. It's just remarkable. And yeah, I feel bad for all you suckers since I am over here rolling in dough. I have a $100 bill that I just lit my cigarette with, so it all pays off in the end. All your hard work is padding my bank account.
You're only smoking cigarettes? I mean, you should be smoking some big fat Cuban cigars.
Try one of these Jamaican cigars, Ambassador. They're pretty good.
Thank you, no. I do not support the work of imperialist stooges.
Oh, only commie stooges, huh?
You did get some questions. I figure, why not read these questions instead of having you read the questions? Stuart Rankin writes in, how do you pick the films you're going to cover? And then, in what way are you trying to keep the podcast fresh to retain subscribers in our current times when people are spending much less time listening to podcasts? So let's go back to the first question. How do you pick the films you're going to cover?
It's a weird combination of things. You know the secret sauce, Rob. You know about the Google Docs. You know where the bodies are buried. You know where we keep like the running list of, I don't know, 100, 200 movies at a time where it's just like, we should talk about this. We should talk about this. And just goes on and on forever. And then at the end of or near the end of the year, I will try to put the list together for the next year. And with that, it's right now we've got 2 theme months, which are Chicktember and Noirvember. And then other things have cropped up where it's like, oh, well, we'll do a theme month of this, a theme month of that, because you look at that list of titles and you start to see patterns. It's like that whole, what was that, the character that Russell Crowe played, John Nash, you start to see all the patterns that are happening here and start to pull those things out. So that's how we ended up with like 3 months of films that were all released in 1969 this year. Which those had huge numbers, just a huge draw of all these obscure titles from 1969. People love that stuff. They eat it up. But then the other part of it is do I have a connection with the film as far as can I get an actor, a director, a writer? Sometimes things just kind of fall in my lap as well, where it's like, hey, this person is available to talk to you. Okay, cool. Not only will I talk to them, but I will figure out an episode to put them on. Like, we're going to be doing an episode about Alien Resurrection, and that came about because Leland Orser was available to talk to me. A mutual friend put us together, and I was like, okay, great. I'll turn this into an Alien Resurrection episode. And then I started looking around. I'm like, hey, Pitof is available for an interview. That would be great for that as well. And maybe I'll be able to talk to Gary Dordan as well, and that'll be a third interview for that. So things just kind of come about organically sometimes.
For me, I would just suggest things. I would say, hey, well, how about this or how about that?
You suggest things, but then that 2x4 that you carried also had a little weight to it.
Well, you know, I grew up in the 80s watching WWF, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan was a hero, so... In what way or ways are you trying to keep the podcast fresh to retain subscribers in our current times when people aren't listening to podcasts so much? See, this is the thing that I noticed was when the shutdown started to happen, and I was still going to the office, I could still listen in the car because I often listen to podcasts in the car.
Me too.
And then everything got backed up when I started working from home, because the time that I usually had set aside to listen to podcasts, I had to make a conscious effort to listen to them. So I would put on my headphones and walk to the post office, or I put on my headphones and wash the dishes, or just sit on the couch. The other thing that I learned is because of the way the iPods are made now, I've gotten really good at listening to podcasts at like 1.5 to 2 times speed. And when I listen to them normal now, they sound like they're like stoned. They sound really slow when you listen at normal speed. Like my brain is going, there's something wrong with his voice. That's what I found. I found that I had to listen at 1.5 to 2 times speed to get through them. But anyway, as for keeping it fresh, keeping your subscribers and current, and since people are spending less time listening to podcasts, what do you think?
I don't know if I've done anything different. I'm just kind of putting them out the same way as I usually do. I'm like you. I don't know how many hundreds of hours of podcasts right now on my phone. I'm looking at my list, and it's like, I will occasionally listen to stuff. I used a lot of time over the summer when I was putting together a couple of bicycles for listening to podcasts. I listened to the whole We Hate Movies series that they did on the Pirates of the Caribbean films while I was doing that. Yeah, I'm super far behind on things. I don't know if we're doing anything that fresh, though perhaps you could say, like, because of... after nearly 10 years of this and after nearly 500 episodes of this, we're starting to get a little bit more of a reputation. And it's like now getting interviews isn't as difficult as it might have been at one time. There's still a lot of layers. There's still a lot of publicists who are actively just like, no. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to give my client publicity, even though that's part of my title. But if I can get to the right people at the right time and people look at the website and they see who's been on the show, I'm getting yeses more than no's sometimes, which is nice. So being able to get like a Willem Dafoe on the show, I figure that keeps it a little fresh because it's like the caliber of star might be bringing more people in. I don't know. Does that sound like a good answer?
No, that's absolutely true. One of the things I think most people don't realize, and I don't think you've ever really talked about this, is, and I have friends who, are actors and directors and producers and people are in the industry, and they will say to me, publicists and managers, their job is to say no. Mm-hmm. That's their job. That's what they get hired to do. So the fact that I know I've seen the messages before where people will go and take you to task and go, well, you didn't get so-and-so, or you didn't try and get so-and-so. Like, no, you really don't understand how this system works. You really don't understand how publicists and managers really work, because
right.
they're like, and just go with me real quick, listener, to understand this. If I'm a publicist or a manager and I say yes to something and my client does it and it's a horrible experience, I'm out of work. Mm-hmm. Or I could be out of work. That could be a strike against me. So saying no is actually playing it safe. Saying no is actually the default position for most people in management of clients. And so why would they take a risk on some guy from Detroit who does a podcast? No. Like, why? You know? But you are right. I think the fact that we have, you know, during my time there and over, you know, your time of doing this over, you know, those 10 years, just had some fucking amazing guests. Uh-huh. And when you put that in the bottom, like, I absolutely love getting emails from you because I love the quotes from the various reviewers that you've gotten over the years. And I love the growing list of people. And I know on my time on the show, it has been amazing to be on there and to do those interviews with you. And I have to say, it's sad too, when some of these people, because you've been around so long, are no longer with us.
Yeah, that's really sad. Somebody was asking me the other day as far as like, well, what percentage of the people that you've talked to do you think have passed away? And I'm just like, that's a really morbid question. I can't give you an answer because, and sometimes I will find out years after they have passed away that they passed away. And it's just like, oh shit. It doesn't feel like I've been doing this for 10 years. It just feels like I've been doing it for just a little while. So it's like, oh, hey, I seem to remember we're going to be doing an episode about this movie. And I seem to remember that this guy worked on it for a little bit. So let me go. I'm going to look him up and see what's going on with him right now. Passed away. I'm just like, oh, man, that sucks. So you don't hear about a lot of people, especially nobody's writing a major obituary about Tobar Mayo if he ever passes away. Hopefully he never does. But it's like, it's going to take a lot to find out, hey, this guy passed. You know, you're going to have to actively look for it sometimes. So, yeah, it's really sad to know that people have passed on that we've talked to. It's a real bummer.
But I feel good in the knowledge that we have captured a bit of that history, that we do have that interview with them. As a matter of fact, talking about what we're all going through right now when it comes to COVID-19, the first episode I was on, we lost this year Joel M. Reed, who died from COVID in New York City. And I was happy to see that the New York Times did an obit for him. So, you know, although he's passed on and we still have that Bloodsucking Freaks episode, and I'm eternally grateful for him taking the time to talk to us about a film that most people write off as just horrible.
We just had Neil Innes's birthday the other day, and when I spoke with him 2 years ago, I mean, he sounded just so full of energy, and it's just amazing how quickly things happen to be like, oh yeah, he passed away last year. And it's like, that doesn't seem possible to me.
Well, there's one guy who was on an episode with us who said, call me back in 10 years. And that was Jean-Claude Carrier, who worked with Buñuel. As far as I know, he's still living. And I think we've got another 4 years maybe. So hopefully he makes it. And I'll call him.
I need to get back with him. Thank you for the reminder, because I want to do an episode about a film that he wrote called Dorothea's Revenge. And I mean, the guy's written well over 100 films. And I reached out to him and he was like, oh yeah, sure. Anytime you want, just let me know. And it's so nice that he answers his own emails and he's usually like super quick about it. Just, oh yeah. Anytime you want to talk about it, you just let me know.
That was the thing. And I know we're probably going to get to that in a minute, but I'll preface this as we get into the next question from one of the listeners, is that to me was like a dream podcast. Like, that was a dream interview, because I got to talk to this guy whose work I've loved for, 20 years or more. Just fantastic. And like you said, just the amount of work that he's done, you can find something in there and go, holy shit, I can't believe it. So Darren Williams wrote in and says, who would be your dream guest for the podcast? And I'm going to put a preface on this and say, give me living and give me, sadly, no longer with us.
As far as living, I would love to talk to Martin Scorsese sometime. I think that would be really fun. He just has such a passion. I would love to just pick his brain about things, because I doubt that there would be a movie I could bring up where he wouldn't have something to say about it. I've been trying to get interviews with Ron Perlman, Steve Buscemi, and William Peterson for a long time. And I mean, I would love to talk to Perlman sometime. I think that he would just be fantastic, and love seeing his tweets. I think he's hilarious. He just bags on people all the time on Twitter. And yeah, I would love to talk about his career, because I find his career is so fascinating. That intersection of him and Guillermo del Toro, it was just like, wow, how did this happen? And it just seemed to change the whole direction of his career.
The thing that's funny is when he started to do films like Hellboy and work with Guillermo del Toro, I thought, really? The guy who played Beast in the Beauty and the Beast TV show that my mom used to watch? I'm like, that guy? And then I saw, is it Drive? It's him and Albert Brooks? And I saw him in that. It was like, I just want to see a movie of those two guys.
Oh, God, Albert Brooks would be another one. Can you imagine talking with him?
I've wanted to do Real Life as an episode for many years, because what's fascinating about Albert Brooks's Real Life is that it was a reaction to An American Family, which was kind of the first reality TV show that PBS actually did in the 70s. And then now you look at it that through the lens of real life and then reality TV as we know it today, and the reality president that we have, it's kind of prescient the way that Albert Brooks works in real life. But, you know, in that film, I mean, not real life as Albert Brooks, but real life, the film. So anyway, I mean, it's such an amazing film, and he's a fantastic filmmaker. So if you can ever get him, let me know.
Okay, will do.
As for Dream Guest, who sadly is no longer with us.
Gosh, that's a good one. I never have thought about that, because I've never...
I mean, you can't, so why bother thinking about it, right?
Had I had my druthers when we did the Contact episode, I would have loved to have talked to Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was such a hero of mine growing up. I loved Cosmos so much. I kind of got into science a little bit because of him. Yeah, I would have loved to have talked to Carl Sagan. I think he would have been my dream interview of someone who's dead.
Sounds good. I like that one. Darren Williams also asks, number 2, would you ever do a full-on list show as a bonus episode? So like run down your top 50 or 100 films?
No.
That's it? Just no?
Yeah, just no.
Yeah, you notice this list? I'm always making lists.
Oh,
in fact, that's probably why Steven Spielberg cast me as Oscar Schindler's List. I said, Steven, I make lists all the time. And he said, that's exactly what I'm looking for.
I write lists all the time, but I don't do rankings of stuff. I try to find the connections of things. So like looking at talking genital movies and like trying to figure out more talking genital films and like getting those grouped together. Those are the kind of lists I make. I don't usually do like a lot of rankings of stuff. I'm not a big fan of High Fidelity, and I'm not a big fan of the guy who has to make rankings of things all the time. There are people that do that, and there are people that do it way better than me. And I would be like Oscar Schindler going, wait, no, I need one more. Let me fit in one more thing. Oh, wait, I changed my mind. This shouldn't be number 98. It should be off the list. I could never be satisfied trying to do a list like that.
No on the list of Mike White's top 50 films of all time that you need to see before you're no longer with us.
1,000 movies you have to see. These are my top 10 Aussie exploitation films. I guess that's another thing, too, is that seeing Tarantino in that Not Quite Hollywood or something.
Yeah, something like that.
And it was like every time they would cut to him, he'd be like, oh, this is my favorite film that has marsupials in the title or whatever. It's just like, okay, gosh, you can't have all of these can't be your favorites. You really need to be a little bit more selective.
This is my 6th favorite film of all time from May of 1974. There was like 10 movies that came out in that month, and this is the 6th best one.
Don't understand.
How far do you want to break it down? Because I was thinking you could do there's not a lot of them, so I'm sure you could do a top 10 of talking genital films.
Chatterbox is pretty close to the top.
You are about to see scenes from a serious movie that depicts one of the most amazing medical discoveries in the history of the world. Whatever you do, don't laugh.
Well, what would you do if your could all of a sudden start to talk and sing?
I will never understand women.
I have a that can talk.
She has a beautiful voice.
Written in, I would rather remain anonymous. Okay, anonymous. Probably that guy with the mask on. Hello, Mr. White, and congratulations on nearing 500 episodes at last. I wanted to take the time to thank you for your work online and your output of the Projection Booth podcast. I think I learned a lot from you guys, your special guests, and maybe appreciate certain obscure gems I otherwise wouldn't have known about. I've been following the Projection Booth podcast since the episode that you did on Batman Returns, and since then, it's been a total blast for the most part. But I can't help myself from asking a few questions that have me scratch my head in confusion about the site, so here it goes. Whatever happened to your first co-host, Mondo Justin? Just before 2012 or so, you guys had a falling out, or you just called it quits? Or was it this you two just wanted to go your separate ways online and in life?
I think it was more the separate ways thing. I'm actually hoping to talk to Mondo Justin for this 10th anniversary thing, and I can ask him what happened on there. But yeah, I think it was more the just going our separate ways. He actually started his own podcast, which he did for a little while. And yeah, now he's working for the Norman Mailer estate. He did a 10-hour podcast. Talk about putting me to shame. 10-hour podcast on Tough Guys Don't Dance. And I think through all of his work that he did on that, he ended up getting in contact with the Mailer estate and now works for those guys. And he's writing a book about Mailer, or he wrote a book about Mailer, and he's writing a book about Frank Perry. So the last time you might have heard Mondo on the program was when we did The Swimmer, and he was an interview on that, and that was one that you were on, Rob. It was like the whole world just all coming together, all the old co-hosts. It was kind of like those Doctor Who specials where you get the old doctors in there.
Since he brought up that transition, like what happened with him, I remember that when he left was when I first started coming in. And then you had a series of different, it was like each week you had a different host. And then, eventually it was kind of like, I guess, going to Buckingham Palace and being knighted, or, The Bachelor or something where they give you the rose, or, and it was like, I pick you. Would you do me the honor of being your co-host? So I was like Sammy Hagar. Mondo Justin was David Lee. And there's definite fans of him. And then I came in, and then people like me, and you haven't had a Gary Cherone, so that's good. It was a terrible era for Van Halen, and most people forget it.
And rightly so.
Number 2 from Mr. Anonymous. I was wondering if more Alan Parker films, given his untimely passing a few months ago, would be in consideration for future episodes other than Evita, of course. Things like Angel Heart or even Pink Floyd The Wall. Any interest in those?
I forgot about this question. Gentleman who wrote, what was his connection? There was somebody I talked to who actually had a big engagement with Angel Heart. William Hortzberg, I believe, was the gentleman's name, and he actually passed away recently as well. I would have liked to have talked to him about that if we were going to do it. I was trying to actually interview Alan Parker for Evita, and yeah, that was right around the time that he passed away. Long story short, I don't really like Angel Heart, and I don't really like some people who like Pink Floyd's The Wall. I like The Wall, but some folks kind of take it a little too far. Not in 2021, but I know for sure Jedediah Ayers would jump at the chance to talk about Angel Heart, and maybe I'll give it another shot, because when I saw it the first time, fucking hated that movie. And sometimes, I was however old when that movie came out, saw it on HBO or something. I was probably way too young to see it. I was mostly there for Lisa Bonet.
Who wasn't in that period?
There was blood on her butt.
Yes.
That was a thing. That was 87, so I was 15 years old when that came out. And yeah, that was William Hortzberg who wrote the novel. And yes, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. I had the opportunity to speak to him about about a book that he wrote about Richard Brautigan. And it was one of those like, hey, I can't wait to have you back on the show and talk about things. And now he's no longer with us.
It's sad. There's, especially considering that a lot of the films that I would say you're interested in, I definitely know I'm interested in, are now almost 50 years old, if not more so. If you ever listen to an episode and you wonder why, I wonder why that person isn't on there. Sometimes we have, you got people who've written books about films or about filmmakers or writers or producers or something, and they end up having to be the stand-in. Not that there's anything wrong with that. A lot of those people are very competent and know quite a bit. In the case of, I remember, I believe it was Bob Whitey talking about the Marx Brothers when we did Duck Soup episode. If you can't get the Marx Brothers, you go to the guy who
literally wrote the book on them.
Exactly.
Or made the documentary.
Number 3 from Mr. Anonymous. If I want to suggest an episode now that's only done exclusively through Patreon, and no more suggestions are being taken into consideration unless they go through Patreon. So I guess the question he's asking is, if I want to make a suggestion, do I have to be a Patreon member? Is that how it works?
Yes. Keeps the riffraff out. I like that. Well, we used to have a suggestion box on the site. And some joker thought it would be very funny to go in there and just put in like that I'm a cuck snowflake and that Trump is going to win the next 4 presidential elections. And I was getting emails every single day, and they would be out of context. Apparently they were listening to the projection booth and making comments through the suggestion box, and I would get these weird things of like, well, this is never going to happen, and I'm like, what the hell are you even talking about? So that was the turd in the punch bowl. That's why I took down the suggestion box on the site, as well as like there was another version that was all run through PHP, and the server upgraded, and I don't know how to write PHP 7.2. I only know PHP, 5.4 or something. So eventually I'll learn the new version of PHP and be able to put together something again. But yeah, for now, I mean, people still send me shit all the time. It's just like, hey, you should cover this. You should cover this. It's like, okay, yeah, if that sounds interesting, I'll put it on the list. You know about the list, Rob. It's ever growing. There's always stuff on there. So yeah, eventually I might get to it. I don't know, as long as it's something that sounds interesting. But yeah, if you want to officially suggest something, if you want to sit me down and say, Mike, I really want you to cover this, then go out there to Patreon, pay you $20 and support me, and then yeah, I'll talk about the movie. So we got a couple episodes coming up in 2021 where it is exclusively Patreon funded, and here you go. That's why I'm talking about this movie. People will be happy. They paid the money, now they get their service.
Well, I'm going to raise my hand and tell you, even though I don't listen to every episode, and even though I haven't been on all that often as of late, I am a Patreon supporter.
And you are a college student, and you're still paying. You and there's like a few other people on there where I'm just like, you shouldn't be paying me money. Stop it. You need to pay for school.
For me, the entire concept behind making sure that I pay to become a Patreon member of the projection booth is the reason why I never liked being on the list for my friends' bands. And what I mean by that is that if my friends play at the bar and it costs me, I don't know, $5, $10 to get in, I tell them, don't put me on the list, even though I'm a journalist or anything like that, even though I'm your friend, because it is my way of putting a marker down and supporting the things that I care about. Because if you don't support the things that you care about and the things that you like, you just won't have them. Because there will come a time when people go, you know what? It's not worth doing this. Why am I, in the case of a band, why am I loading up my car and driving to the bar to play for basically more people on stage than there are watching me? Or there's no money to be made from doing this. So not saying you're going to retire from it, but I always believe that, you should pay for the things that you like and the things that you care about, because one day you'll turn around and they just won't be there.
That's a great analogy.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about Patreon is how do you like it? Do you think it's a good platform for creators and people that want to do things, or do you find it to be kind of a pain in the ass?
The interface sucks. I really think that the usability of Patreon is not good. I'm very patronizing. You know that. I patronize people as well as I am a patron of people as well as I am a creator.
Beecher and the creator will become one.
And who is the creator?
The creator is that which created Beecher.
Who is Beecher?
Beecher is that which seeks the creator.
It is very difficult to navigate the site as being two things in one account. So like the other day, I was trying to figure out where the RSS feed is because I wanted to copy the RSS feed. Because if you're a Patreon subscriber, you don't have to go out to iTunes or Stitcher or any of these other places and subscribe that way. There's a separate RSS feed that you can go into your favorite podcatcher and put that in there. You're going to get episodes early, and you're going to get them without that Starbucks ad that you're talking about cutting into the middle of our conversation. You're going to get just here's the after movie diner. Yeah, here's the Adam and Eve ad, like those kind of things, but you don't get like all of the noise that you would get via other ways. So I'm trying to find that thing, and it took me forever, and I don't know if I ever even did find the RSS feed. So as a usability person, I find some of those things frustrating. Otherwise, it's okay. They take too much money from people. I don't appreciate that either. They are doing a thing now where you can pay ahead. You can subscribe for a year and you get a discount. I think like 10, 15%, something like that. So that's cool. But right now, as far as I know, I think that's the only game out there other than OnlyFans. And people don't want to see me naked.
How do you know?
Oh, trust me, I know.
I have been close to you. Never in any form of undress, but...
You ever seen a grown man naked?
You ever hang around a gymnasium?
You like gladiator movies, Rob? You have a whole month about gladiator films. Are you more of a sponge or a sponge?
Do you consider the eating of oysters to be moral and the eating of snails to be immoral?
Mr. Anonymous, number 4. And lastly, if I ever begin a podcast on movies like you do, what's the best advice you could give if I ever wanted to try this for real? It's doubtful I get the guests that you do, but generally speaking, what are some of the secrets to leading an engaging movie-oriented podcast or blog at its best? Can, some of that be applied to your YouTube channel as well? I mean, in terms of structure and presentation.
I don't know about YouTube. I try to put stuff up on YouTube and people just complain, where's the video? Or it gets flagged as being inappropriate for children, or it gets flagged as intellectual property because there's a snippet of a song or a full song inside of it. So I don't go near YouTube. I try not to. If you ever want to start a podcast, just fucking do it. I don't have a lot of advice for people, just other than try to make it different than other things. I think I've told this story before. I'm pretty sure I told you, Rob, when we first started up the podcast, I made a list of like all the things I didn't like about other movie podcasts and said, we're not going to do this, and have held to that. So that's why not every episode begins with 20 minutes of, so what'd you watch this week? Then eventually you get to the movie. No, that's why we start with the preview. Here's the movie. Here's the description. Here's the discussion, and let's go. It's not like, what are they even talking about? I don't even understand what this episode is about.
One of the things that I think some listeners may not understand philosophically beyond the Fight Club rule that I helped institute is I remember having a conversation with you, and I think you had said to me, I would like these podcasts to be like the 33rd and a third, or the 33 and a third book series. And people who aren't hip to what that is a whole series of books that's just one album, and it's written by one writer, and there's sort of a timeless quality to the book. And what I mean by that is they've written a book about that one album, and you could read it now or you could read it 10 years from now, and it would probably still hold up. Now, granted, there's new information that comes out, there's different things that happen, yeah, but the first chapter isn't about like, in the case of what we're talking about a film podcast, what you saw at the theater that week. Because if you were to go, one of the things that I really love about the projection booth is if I don't listen to that episode right now, I know I can listen to it a couple of months from now or a year from now, or I can go back 10 years to your first episodes and listen to those, and they still hold up because you're not talking about topical things. You're not talking about the things that we're doing in this moment. You're talking about this piece of art in its own, and it lives in its own sort of bubble in its own time.
33 1/3 is a perfect example. The books that like the BFI does, or Devil's Advocates, or Constellations, like those little books where it's like, here you go, the cultography type of books where it's like, this is this thing, here's its influences, here's what it influenced, here's where it was in time, and trying to dig into that as much as possible. Like, I'm hoping that we're not the small books, but more like the thicker books if possible, but I don't want like the doorstops.
Mr. Anonymous closes off by saying, I'm a newbie at this, so excuse my relative unawareness on that last question, but in closing, my favorite episodes are Once Upon a Time in the West, Batman Returns, Apocalypse Now, Blue Velvet, and Blade Runner. So there you have it. And again, congratulations on reaching 500 episodes and here to 500 more. And good luck on the next few that come in the near future. You're going to need it.
Well, that sounds ominous, doesn't it?
Are you sure this isn't the guy who was spamming you through the suggestions? Long-time listener, first-time caller.
I'm a bit of a ditto head. I'm pretty sure that's not him because he didn't call me a cuck snowflake, which is just ironic because I think we found out who the true snowflakes really are.
Living up in the mountains like I used to, a snowflake is a very delicate thing. But when they all get together, avalanches are nasty. Just be mindful. As for that, I think I was able to weave in the questions I had for you, along with the questions that you got for the readers, not the people that typed them in. I'm sure maybe you have a few that people use that new technology and sent you voicemails or things like that. But I just want to say, sir, thank you again. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to catch up with you, and thank you for letting me be part of this institution. A mental institution, but an institution nonetheless, that has existed for almost a decade now. So congrats to you.
Well, thank you, sir. And yeah, you are welcome back anytime. I'm looking forward to talking to you in 2021 and hopefully even more than that in 2022. And good luck with you and good luck with all the stuff that you're working on. You've got a lot of irons in the fire.
That's the thing with me. I always have to be working on something because if I don't, then the, how would you say, the existentialism kind of creeps in and I realize the reality of what we live in. And then I go,
I think that's maybe why I do so much on the podcast is just to keep my mind off of other things.
So to those folks out there who can relax and enjoy their lives, I salute you. And hope maybe one day I can join the ranks of you as well.
All right, we are back. And thank you so much to Rob. Always good to talk with him. Always good to connect with folks that you haven't talked to in a long time. Speaking of that, I don't think I should delay this one any longer. Let's go ahead. We're going to check in with Justin Bozung, who, as many folks know, he was Mondo Justin, probably still is Mondo Justin, and he was the first co-host of the show. Let's hear what's been going on with him since he left the show, as well as his memories of when we first started the projection booth just about 10 years ago. I want to ask you what projects you're working on, but I know sometimes people don't feel comfortable unless something is like actually already done. Can you tell me some of the stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, so I mean, nothing's much changed for me really. I just, for many years now, I guess I've been in the throes of finishing my book about Frank Perry. It's real close. It's just basically I kind of struggle the element of turning over new research and integrating that, and also in doing rewrites and satisfying my OCD. And, it's the way I look at it is just like there's only one opportunity to kind of nail it right. And I just want to get it right. Like the last book I worked on, the Norman Mailer book, I did, it's a collection of essays, but about 170,000 words, and 45,000 of those words were mine, and Mailer had some work in there too, and his were about 35,000, right? So that tells you exactly how much was kind of in there, and looking back at that, I read what I wrote, and I'm still pretty happy with it, but ultimately there's just some things in there that I just didn't like, that I should have expanded on, should have said a little bit clearer, should have tightened the metaphor up a little bit. So so I just don't want that to happen again, basically, to me. It's not like I'm sure no writer is ultimately ever happy with what they write in retrospect, but I don't know. There's just some things that I want to make perfect, if that's not really possible, but at least as perfect in my head as it can be. And I'm always turning over new material. So, especially with in the age of COVID, it's been quite a challenge, because I had some research trips planned this year to go do some kind of last minute research out west. And that's sort of been, of course, nixed. And I had supposed to go up to New York again and go back to work in the archives. And those were all nixed because of COVID. So that's really putting a damper on me. I've been fortunate, though, that it's taken some time, but the blessing out of it is, in fact, that if I had hurried through it, I wouldn't have gotten the opportunities that have come subsequent to me delaying things, like, finding Frank Perry's first major, his first serious girlfriend, and finding her and talking to her, this, 90-year-old woman who's blind now and lives in Arizona, and at one point was good friends with William Burroughs and knew all the beats and all this stuff, and befriending Eleanor Perry's family, and then finally giving me instilling me trust, right? Where, back in, I guess it was June, I, heard the FedEx guy come to the door, and went up to the door, and there was a giant box on the porch, and I opened it up, and it was just stacks and stacks of materials related to Eleanor from her family, like pictures and scripts, and like even her original like college thesis was in there, and a rough draft of a biography that her son was actually in the process of working on about her, but he eventually abandoned. And so just all this stuff that, I got to catalog that, I got to go through it, I got to think about how it fits into the thing, what's important, what's not. And so, yeah, it's just quite a task. The state of the book is way beyond what I definitely ever envisioned it to be. Who would have knew 5, 6, 7 years ago when I started it, that I'd actually had been able to track down, Frank Perry's army buddies from this time he served in Korea that are still alive, and talk to them, and his girlfriend and his family, and get his military record from the government, and get his college transcripts. And, it's crazy. I've done, like 170 hours of interviews with people now. So it's going through those, making sure my I's are dotted and my T's are crossed to my satisfaction as well. I'm sure that a lot of folks are interested in, I know a lot of folks are interested in Frank. The interest has definitely been building up over the last few years, but, especially we just had a couple of Frank's films finally come to DVD and Blu-ray for the first time, and which is great. And I'm tickled that those are out. They definitely deserve to be seen. So yeah, but I've got to satisfy my own instincts and desires for this project before I can, fulfill anyone else's.
Now, you're talking about your Norman Mailer book, and you're working for, what is it, the Norman Mailer Foundation?
There's the Norman Mailer Estate, which is, so basically, so the Mailer family, they actually sold off almost all of Norman's writings to Random House a few years ago. So they don't even own Mailer's writings anymore, per se. There's a few of them that are kind of floating in various other ownership, but so there's the Mailer Estate, which is run by his oldest son and his oldest daughter. Michael and Susan. And so basically they kind of oversee with a kind of charter group of board members, like, what kind of happens, right? So it's like, well, what do we want? And they'll work with Random House, right? So it's like Random House will say, like, we want to put out, for I think it was last year, they put out a anniversary edition of Mailer's Why Are We in Vietnam book, because they saw these intense parallels between what was and Miami and the Seas of Chicago and Armies of the Night. They saw these intense parallels between the protests that were going on in Washington and everywhere else with what was occurring in the 60s, right? And so that was a big project, because then they had some new scholarship, write new forewords and stuff, and then that actually so that's tied in with the Norman Mailer Society, which is also it's a collection of mostly university-based scholars with a extreme interest in Norman Mailer studies. And so that, that's comprised of mainly teachers from various universities around the United States, but also, in that is a former, governor of Hawaii, and there's some famous folks in it. A guy used to produce the Dick Cavett Show, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of people that are kind of Mailer stalwarts these days. So basically what I do is I got involved with that back in 2014, and so it just kind of led basically from me having an interest in it to doing some work, did a podcast about one of Mailer's movies. That led to me going to Wilkes University in Pennsylvania to give like a little lecture on Mailer's movies. And then from there, that led to them offering me kind of a part-time gig to basically be like an archivist for their AV stuff, because there's like hundreds and hundreds of hours of Mailer audio and video that was kind of just sitting around. So started working on that, where basically started cataloging things and transcribing things and breaking that up, put it in the cloud, serving it to people in Mailer studies who have an interest in a particular topic that don't know where to look for research. So then, every year it leads to me also giving a presentation, on Mailer, or like 2015, I think I did Mailer and Picasso, and I did some things on the movies. And I mean, it's just kind of every year, with the exception of the last couple of years, I haven't gone, but obviously because of COVID this year, but it was a virtual thing, but I just didn't really want to do it. Anyways, so yeah, that kind of led to that. And that's, of course, led to all Mailer's kids are interested in film and television studies, or film and television in general. Michael Mailer, Norman's oldest son, he used to be kind of really close with James Toback. And so they produced some films together, and he's got a good working relationship with Alec Baldwin. And John Buffalo Mailer, Mailer's youngest son, who's actually my age, he's become quite a accomplished writer, playwright, screenwriter. He's written some films, and also he's been an actor. He was in, I think he was Oliver. He was Shia LaBeouf's buddy in the Wall Street sequel about Oliver Stone, and he also Matthew Barney, the Cremaster cycle. So Matthew Barney made this amazing film. I mean, if you get a chance to see it, you should definitely see it. It's anyways, it was like a 6-hour adaptation of Mailer's Egyptian novel called Ancient Evenings. It was never released theatrically. Of course, you had to go to the museum to see it in a limited time. But so John Buffalo Mailer plays Norman in the movie. And it's basically like an opera, but there's so it's Mailer's book, which Barney sees as analogous to the creation of Detroit, and with the auto industry. And so Barney spent a lot of time in Detroit shooting sections of it. He spent some time in L.A. filming there too. But I saw it, I guess, back in 2015. I saw it at I went to a private screening with Barney, the producer, and the Mailer family, and it was just like it was like a mind blower. It was like I think it might be the greatest movie I've ever seen. I couldn't believe what I saw. I like sat there and watched the whole 6 hours. It was just a mind fuck. It was amazing. So yeah, so then that led to me, of course, being asked to assemble and create the book about Mailer's films. the first book ever about his films and probably the last book about his films. But yeah, so that's kind of what happened there.
Well, you mentioned the podcast, and I'm not sure how many of the listeners realize that after you did the projection booth, you did your own podcast for a while, and some people are just like, oh, 7-hour podcast on Conan, that's amazing. But you did, what, 10-hour podcast on Tough Guys Don't Dance?
12 hours.
12 hours,
yeah.
Holy shit.
12 hours, yeah. And I expanded it at one point. I think maybe the first release was 10.5 hours, and then subsequently I added another hour and a half later because I did that, and then I kind of got bored with it, and so then I kind of pulled it, and then the Mailer family asked for me to include it in their permanent collection kind of thing. So one of the guys that works on the digital side, the back end of like the website design and stuff, decided to we wanted to host that stuff over on archive.org because the whole intention with that was, in the world of academics, it's like, a lot of stuff is behind a paywall. And so one of the ideas in the Mailer thing is like they want people to not, they want people to see this stuff. They want people to have access to research. So, future scholarship can continue because, frankly, Mailer's not being read or studied or taught in college. So, they thought it'd be great as a teaching tool to have that available. So I gave that to them, and they're featuring it on their channel on the archive.org site or whatever. But I did the 10.5 hours. And then once I got into the archives, I found a tape of a 90-minute, I think 90-minute tape of Mailer, a press conference that was recorded at the Cannes Film Festival when Tough Guys Don't Dance. It premiered there out of competition in '87, and even Mailer was on the panel that year. But so there was a panel with the French press. It was Mailer, the actress Deborah Sandlin, Tom Luddy, I think a couple other people from the movie, but I can't remember now. But anyway, so I just tacked that on to the back of the podcast. They said I could do it. So yeah, I made it, I think, over 12 hours in total.
Wow, that is crazy. Tell me more about the podcast, because I don't think it went on for too long, but the episodes that you did were fantastic. I remember that, of course. And then you did, what was it, Strawberry Statement?
So the first one I did, I think, I did the Jerry Lewis series, I think was the first one. I think. No, you're right. The first series was the Kim Darby series, which I did an episode on Strawberry Statement, Grissom Gang, The One and Only, and then Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. And then I did Jerry Lewis series. And then I kicked over and did a Norman Mailer series. And then I had plans to do some other ones. We were going to do a big multi-hour thing on Blake Edwards' 10 and Skin Deep and 2001. And we were going to do like Ninth Configuration and Somewhere in Time. we had a bunch of ideas we were going to kick together, and I don't know, I just got to a point where I had to decide whether I wanted to try to take writing more seriously or it was too hard for me to juggle writing and trying to podcast and trying to contribute magazine articles to, like places like Shock Cinema and stuff. So it's like basically just gave up podcasting, gave up trying to write for magazines, and just focused on the stuff that I wanted to do solely.
If memory serves, I was the one who didn't want to get into podcasting, and you were the one that had to convince me.
See, I don't remember it that way at all.
Really? What are your memories? Tell me what you remember, because I find that I'm my own worst censor, and that I tend to shape my memories the way that makes sense to me.
I feel like it was you who suggested it, and I feel like, but you may have just suggested it kind of on a whim, right? I feel like you, because we met, and I had a website at the time, and you had just released your anthology, and you contacted me and said, "Hey, I really like your website. It's not like a usual website that has kind of like the latest bullshit news on it about movies or whatever. It's like, yes, it's dedicated to genre or whatever, but like you're focused more on like retrospective pieces. So it's like, I want to see if you'll review my book or whatever." And I was like, yeah, I would love to do that. I definitely know who you are. I'm familiar with your work, and I'd love to do that. And we both discovered we lived in the Metro Detroit area at the time. And so we met up for lunch at a pizza place, I think it was, and exchanged pleasantries and talked and chatted. And I got the book, and we became friends, and we hung out a few times. And then we decided that we were going to go to the B-Movie Festival in Franklin, Indiana. We drove down there in your car because at the time I remember I had no job and I had a shitty car. I just remember having great conversations all the way down there. I remember being blown away by kind of the Bible Belt, all the Bible Belt architecture and sculpture in the air everywhere we went as we descended in deep into the heart of Indiana. And and I feel like on the way back, because it was such a great weekend. We had such a good time. We saw a lot of great films, had some fun experiences. We saw Rocky Horror at the drive-in, saw Nomads at the drive-in. And I feel like on the way back, you were like, yeah, we should, you listen to podcasts. And I don't know, I kind of took that as your hint that maybe you're interested in starting a podcast. Because I didn't necessarily have too much. I didn't really have any aspirations of that at the time. But I just said, yeah, I guess at that point in my head, I had already kind of thought about it, but I didn't know where to start, I guess. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, but I feel like it was you were the catalyst to sort of jumpstart and get it going.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Like I remember so much of that, but I thought it was you going like, we could do this. We could do this way better than these jokers. Cause I think we were listening to some podcasts on the way and you're just like, oh, we should do this. I thought that was you.
Well, I think that was a conversation we had too, but I feel like it was like, I think more of that was a criticism we both expressed, right? Cause I feel like I was like, yeah, I don't listen to podcasts cause I'm just like, can't stand them.
Right.
And I feel like you were like, well, I like podcasts, but like, yeah, I feel like I don't like a lot of people that host podcasts. And so I think it was a mutual, like, yeah, we could totally do this better.
You set the bar by like the first episode we did, you managed to get Richard Rush and Steve Rails back.
Well, I was also I feel like I was kind of a control freak at that point too. Well, I don't know. Like, yes, I feel like Mike White is the projection booth. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, right? Like, you're the founding member, and that name, that brand is forever going to be associated with your name forever. You're the backbone, the heart and soul of the projection booth. But I feel like my contribution, if I had any true contribution, was the fact that I was the one that sort of came up with the idea to put interviews or approach people aggressively to put interviews in it. Cause I feel like at first you were like, yeah, I want to do interviews, but like, we should not do an interview like every episode. We should kind of do it every other. And I feel like the fact that I went out and got Richard Rush and Rails back, that was the point that I feel like that was when we both kind of looked at each other, I think, and said like, yeah, we could definitely do this every week if it's really this easy.
And then, second episode, you managed to track down Tobar Mayo. It's like, who else interviews Tobar Mayo? It could have been like just two a-holes sitting around talking about movies, but then you're like, yeah, no, let's put these interviews in here. And then suddenly it goes from two a-holes talking about movies to two a-holes talking about movies with these wonderful interviews in the middle of it, where it's like, who has ever heard from Tobar Mayo about Abar, the first Black Superman?
What kind of set us apart from any other podcast was that we were focusing on a more kind of succinct specialty cinema, right? Yes, there's like genre cinema, there's cult cinema, but we were like deep in the trenches, right? Like, I don't know, maybe you've done the research, but I can't imagine there's many podcasts out there in the ether that have covered Abar, the Black Superman. I mean, yeah, Stuntman, okay, fine. Yeah, the Warriors, fine. But Abar, come on. I mean, we've got to be one of the first, if not maybe just a handful out in the internet world that's done that. So, yeah, I mean, it was always fun because it was like a challenge every time. I felt like every week was a challenge in the sense that we had to track down these people, right, that we didn't know where in the hell they were, if we could even get in touch with them, right? So, I mean, not that it's a secret, but I mean, we relied a lot on, even before social media, I think we relied more on like IMDb, an IMDb Pro account, right? That was our bread and butter in terms of getting contacts with someone, right? I mean, these days, like, I can't even tell you the last time I've been on IMDb. There's way more easier ways to find people. Back then, it was like the only thing we knew, right? So that's what we did. So it was a miracle that, you know, someone like, I don't remember if Tobar Mayo was actually on IMDb, but I do remember specifically that Richard Rush's phone number was on IMDb Pro. You could just call him up. So I just called him up, right?
You also set that bar as far as we're not just going to have one interview. You know, of course, the first episode we had 2 interviews, but then I can't remember. It was like not even the 10th or 11th episode, and you were just like, we're going to do Freaked. And you end up getting like Alex Winter, Tom Stern, Megan Ward, Lee Arenberg, Tim Burns. I mean, it's just like, here's this huge thing about Freaked. And again, this is like 2011 when you're doing this, and it's before, like, now everybody's just like, oh yeah, Freaked, it's fantastic. But back then it was just like, what is this movie? And you're getting all of these people to talk about it.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we found that we had in common right away was we did like 95% of the same movies. And so I think it made it easy for us. And plus we also worked under the guise of, this week is your turn, next week is your turn, right? This week is Justin's turn to pick the movie, etc. And so with Freak, that was an easy one because I had actually been friends with this. I can't remember his last name now, but his name was Bill. Anyways, he's like the guy that today he's like the guy who started the whole Days of the Dead horror conventions that are all over the country. His name was like Bill Philpott or something. I don't remember. But anyways, so I was kind of an acquaintance of his, and I basically traded him because I had this spreadsheet of contacts. Like I had like, I don't remember, like Steve Railsback or Richard Rush. I had their contacts, and I was like, if you can put me in touch with Alex Winter, then I'll trade you this contact or whatever. And so he said, sure. And so like, so I got Alex, and of course through Alex Winter, I got Tim and Tom. And then as luck would have it, Lee Arenberg was in Detroit that month for a comic convention. And I think the only challenging one was Megan Ward. That was the one I kind of had to sweet talk her agent or whatever into allowing it. But as with anything, and you can attest to that too, is once you have an X number of people on board, the other people kind of fall into place fairly easy. The thing that I felt kind of bad about back then was like that I felt like I always had better luck than you getting those people, right? Like I was like, because I remember like, I got all those Freak people. Then it's like, I remember you wanted to do Dune so bad. And it's like, I wanted to do Dune so bad because I love Dune, but it's like we had no luck getting anyone, right? I can remember specifically at that time working with you to try to get people to come on the Dune show. And I even remember like at the time I was working at this internet company, and I remember driving home at night in the winter, getting a call on my phone from David Lynch's, I don't know, maybe it was like a PR person or something. And I remember like talking to this gal, like telling her all about like what we wanted to do and what rabid, crazy fans we were of Dune. And like, she was like, yeah, she's like, you sound really sincere. Normally David would be happy to do this, but it's Dune and he just doesn't like to talk about it. And I was like, oh, so yeah. But I just felt like you had the films you picked were, I mean, they're all great films, but I feel like the thing that kind of gave me the edge was I picked more, I guess, more accessible people. Like you knew damn well you weren't going to get Peter Weller for the RoboCop episode, right? You knew you weren't going to get that. You know you weren't going to get Chow Yun-Fat for The Killer, things like that. It just wasn't going to happen, right?
That caused me to look outside of that. So having like the writers or whatever, just like this guy wrote a book about John Woo, so we'll talk with him instead. But yeah, it would have been great to have John Woo on The Killer episode.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that I learned. That's one thing I've learned over the years. Since I left the projection booth was that sometimes those people, like the assistant director or the focus puller or the grip or the wardrobe person, those people have not just great stories but better stories than the people like the director or an actor or a cinematographer, right? I found that those people can actually give you a whole lot of insights into the production of things when you're least expecting it, right? Because you might not think that the wardrobe person might have a lot of insights into whatever, but they actually can if you hit the right person in the right movie.
Now, you mentioned 2001. You were working on the 2001 episode right around the time that we ended up splitting up. Do you want to talk about how you have so graciously donated your materials for a future episode?
Well, I wanted it to be done, right? And since your heart and soul is in the podcast, and you are the podcast, I thought it was only fair to, yes, I mean, the interviews are mine, but I wanted them to go where they were intended to go originally, right? So I went out at the time. I can't remember what we were working at the time, but I know we had talked about, it was kind of a series of things, right? Because I remember we had talked about Magnificent Ambersons, and we did that, and then that got shelved. And then for a long time, we had talked about 2001. I just slowly started working my way through the interviews and contacting people, and that led to, I just kept finding one after the other. It was like I got a hold of Ivor Powell, and he's like, well, you should talk to this person. You should talk to Andrew Burke, and you should talk to Dan Richter, and so they just kind of kept one door kept opening the next, and to where I started, building. I don't know, whatever 20, I don't know, however many interviews there are, 12 to 20, somewhere around there. And I know I was lucky enough to get one of the last interviews with Fred Ordaway, who was one of the technical consultants. He died, I think, a year or less after I interviewed him. And so, yeah, your listeners should have a pretty big treat there, because we one of the last audio documents of Fred Ordaway before he passed away, and he's got a ton of crazy insights. I mean, I'm still meeting people from 2001. One of the people that worked very closely with Frank Perry, Frank's assistant, Lydia, who was with Frank from, I guess, 65, 66 up until 69, 70. She worked for Kubrick during 2001 in New York. And so the reason why Frank hired her was because Frank was such a fan and friend of Kubrick that he just wanted everything to do with Kubrick. And so he hired her as his assistant strictly on the premise that because she had worked with Kubrick, right? So, yeah, I've actually been lucky enough to I went to New York, I guess it was last summer, and spent a couple days with her, and very, very tight-lipped. She just doesn't want to talk about anything, but she wanted to meet me, and we spent a day together at an apartment and went around to lunch. She lives right up by Strawberry Fields, and just a couple buildings down from the Dakota where Lennon was shot. But anyways, I spent some time with her, and at the end of my visit, she comes out from her back room of her apartment and hands me this huge box. And I open it, and it's just filled with all these memos and scripts from Frank's movies, and it's just amazing. She's like, yes. She's like, these, I want to give you these. She's like, they're yours to use. She's like, but I want them in Frank's archive when you're done. And so, I've got original scripts for Last Summer and Diary of a Mad Housewife and Doc, and some notes and some memos and some photos of her and Frank. Just a huge box of stuff, and I had to cart it on the subway. Anyway, so I'm still meeting, and when I got to meet her, I did get to talk to her briefly a little bit about Kubrick, and she shared this amazing story about the day that Paul Newman came over to Stanley's apartment, and she had to open the door, and she was just head over heels in love with him. Just, stories like that aren't going to really yield any interesting insights per se into the production of 2001. But, just nonetheless, it's really cool kind of anecdotes, that people have for that stuff. So, yeah, so with 2001, I figured it was time for them to come home to the projection booth. I know that the episode will not be what we truly envisioned it to be, because I should say we probably didn't have an exact vision for it at that point. But one of the things we did talk about doing, which I'm kind of sad we'll probably never be able to do, is we had paid I didn't pay him, but I offered him like a kind of a marketing trade, right? I was like, if you do this for us, I'll promote you on the show. And so we had that voiceover artist record our IDs, and as Hell 9000, he sounded just like Hell 9000. That would have been great to hear. So, but I'm sure you'll I have the utmost confidence that I'm sure you'll make it way better than I would have made it anyway. So I'm not too worried about it.
I wouldn't count on that. I just hope that I do right by you. We were talking about possibly making it the first 24-hour podcast.
Yeah. That would have been amazing. I can't even fathom that. Like you could do it, right? I mean, it's just, your listeners would take them a couple weeks to get through it probably. But I feel like there actually is enough material there, and there probably is, if you structure it right, there is a way I think you could probably break that thing down and do it, right? You could do 1 hour devoted to, you could do 2 hours devoted to the apes, and, you could go into all the influences on that. And, you've got an hour interview with Dan Richter to use. So, I mean, it's definitely, I feel like just with the interviews in that, you probably would have 12, 13, 14 hours just of interviews to combine in that, right? So that just leaves you with 10 hours of programming to fill.
And I've got to spend at least 6 hours on 2010, the year we make contact.
That's right. And you've got the comic books to think about. You've got the novels, the scripts, the different versions of the scripts, the controversy with Kubrick accusing what's his name, the guy who did the makeup for Planet of the Apes. So that guy stealing his makeup ideas for the apes from 2001.
Because that was just right around that same time, wasn't it?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because here in Atlanta, so before this whole COVID thing kind of got out of control, I befriended this guy who. So there's a special effects house here in Atlanta that does all the makeup effects for. They did the Cheddar Goblin for Mandy, the Nicolas Cage movie, and they did some Game of Thrones stuff, and they did some Rob Zombie stuff, and they did some. There's a show called Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell, which I think was on Adult Swim or something. Anyways, so they do all these special effects here. So I met one of the guys that works there, and he invited me to their effects studio, and it's a crazy place. But I went there, and we were talking about monsters and stuff, and I talked about 2001 for some reason, and I'd said, there's always this idea that Kubrick always accused such and such of stealing some of his ideas for the apes. And the guy flipped out on me, the owner. He's like, that's not true. He's like, I know that. He's like, I know that guy. He's like, I know that work well. And he's like, there's no way. He's like, that, Planet of the Apes came out in 68 and 2001 came out in 68. And I was like, yes, but they were actually working on 2001 back in like 65. So, I mean, that was like a 4 or 5 year, production. So it's theoretically possible. I think Dan Richter, I think in the interview I have with him even alludes to it, if memory serves. So it'll be interesting to see what you come up with. And I mean, I don't think there's anyone else alive that you can talk to.
Yeah, no, you've covered so much of it. I'm just like, is there any other interviews I can do for this thing? Or is it just going to be now the research, which luckily from a few years ago, I bought a bunch of those books. So I'm excited to break those out again and reread them, and just even to see the way that the story progressed, and to see how Clark was taking different pieces of his own stuff and putting them back together, recombining things in the new ways. It's like, okay, the people who say that the movie doesn't make sense are probably some of my least favorite people in the world. It's just like, seems pretty straightforward to me, guys.
I feel like there's so much to cover, right? So you could not only cover all those things you just mentioned and things I mentioned, but I mean, it is arguably one of the most heavily written. There's a few films that are written about as much as 2001. Do you know, like Wells, Hitchcock? Yeah, there's a ton of scholarship out there, but there's also a disturbing amount of scholarship about 2001. And my theory about that is because I feel like sometimes, when things are overtly ambiguous, it makes your mind's acceptable to explore down those rabbit holes, right? Where it's like it's like going into a David Lynch movie, right? Like, you're going to have to kind of work to find something, to find a resolution, right? When you watch Mulholland Drive or something, or like Inland Empire, you're going to have to kind of work to get through that, right? To find some sort of meaning. And so I feel like 2001 is open to that too, right? I mean, it's as simple as at the end of 2001 when Keir Dullea smashes the glass, right? You could say, because Kubrick is Jewish, that's an homage to his Judaism, right? And the glass symbolizes in Judaism the rebirth, the break him at weddings, right? And so it's the start of a new adventure. And what does Keir Dullea do? He breaks the glass and he's off on a next adventure. It's something like that. There's so much stuff in there, right? Like it's just open to endless interpretations. There's endless of writers you could talk to, fans of the movie. I mean, even at some point when we were starting to work on it, I was actually reaching out to. I had put some posts on some forum boards. I can't remember which ones that they were now, but I actually had found some original people that were like original projectionists that had showed it in Cinerama, and they were really cool. They were like, "Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it. That movie changed my life," and sent me pictures of the theaters that they, the Cinerama domes around the country that they had screened it in and stuff, and it was just crazy.
Like I said, I want to make you proud with this one, so I'm going to do my best.
Oh, I have no doubt it'll be great. I'm not worried about it. It'll be. I mean, you got a lot of wonderful buzz off of Ambersons, and I feel like the podcast has reached the heights it has reached now because of you and only you, and I feel like the more adventurous and more daring you are with these episodes, and I feel like that's what sets you apart from film nerds or whatever podcast.
Well, I still feel that you pushed me out of the nest, so thank you.
Well, okay, I'll take your word for it.
Well, Justin, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man.
Now, it has been a few months since we've done an Ego Fest. I wanted the 10th one to line up with the 10th year, but it's actually lining up with the 500th episode. It's the end of the year. It's a good time to reflect, go back and talk about things. One thing I want to talk about is Patreon, where we've got a whole bunch of new levels. I added stuff a few months ago. I put out an announcement about that. So there are levels where it comes to just getting a shout out during one of these Ego Fests, which I should be doing shout outs more like as we get new patrons, shouting them out in the show, because otherwise folks are going to sit through a really long list of things, and that's what I have planned for towards the end of the show. So I just wanted to warn folks, it's going to be a little bit like a roll call. It's almost like when you're sitting there watching your niece and nephew graduate from high school, and it's like, oh, please just get on with it. I think I've got 130 names of people that I need to thank for this. So, I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So that's the first level, is that you get a shout out. Second one.
Second prize, a set of steak knives.
First one, which is just $1 a month. You get a shout out on here. Not too bad. That's definitely way less than the price of a cup of coffee. Second one, $5 a month. You get monthly updates, like I said. That's pretty much usually just for patrons. You get that. Also, if there's any sort of like, hey, here's this book that you might want to read. Here's some other things that are coming up. Those little fun links, sort of like, here's a really super rare movie. Let's go ahead and maybe make it available to the $5 patrons. $10. Wow, you get early access to pretty much every episode that I put out. There is an RSS feed that you can use there instead of any other RSS feeds, and that will get you episodes before they come out. They're also, I can't say commercial free, because they'll still have the, hey, listen to this podcast, listen to this other one, like, 2-3 spots in the middle of the show. So you'll get those, but you won't get the, other, I can't say annoying, but other ads that show up from Spreaker that get injected in there. That is $10 a month, and for $20 a month, you get to request a film. So you get to request something right now for 2022, because we've got a lot of stuff already for 2021 where folks have picked things out. So as we go through 2021, you're going to be hearing, hey, this was a requested episode through Patreon. So be prepared. Right now we've only got, I think, 7 folks at that level. 7 out of 12, meaning that you could pick, everybody could pick one movie for a month for a year. But 7 months of 2021, you will have special requested episodes. One other thing that Patreon is doing right now is they are offering 10% discount. So if you wanted to spend, what would that be? So the $5 a month over 12 months. Oh, of course, I picked the one that's toughest to do. What would that be? $45? And then you could take 10% off of that. So $4.50. So you're paying $41 a year, I think. Let me get RoboHost in here to figure that one out.
12 months at $5 a month is $60 a adult. Less $6 for the 10% discount is $54. Why don't you buy a fucking calculator?
One other thing I wanted to mention is that, as well as doing the podcast, 2020 allowed me the opportunity to do some commentaries for DVDs. So there are commentaries out there for The Last Starfighter. There's a commentary coming out from Second Run in January for Tomorrow I Will Wake Up and Scald Myself with Tea. And with that one, you can hear that commentary, as well as the one that was done for the show back in September. So you actually have your choice as far as which commentary you want to listen to. I was very surprised recently when Synapse finally put out Massacre at Central High. I had given them all of the raw interviews that I did with the folks that we did for the Massacre at Central High episode. So I think all of those have shown up on the Blu-ray, which is fantastic. Also, there have been some bonus things here and there, like American Tiger from Cauldron Films. Got the American Tiger episode that we did, and then also that has a commentary from Sam and Kat on there too. There is one that I'm waiting for, one announcement of a Blu-ray from Arrow that I'm waiting for, but I think it ties into a first run movie that got delayed because of COVID, so I imagine if they're doing what I think they're doing, once they announce or once that movie comes out or it gets closer to coming out in 2021, the Blu-ray will be announced, so it has a nice tie-in.
The sleeper must awaken.
Stay tuned for that one. And then, of course, I also want to plug that Survival of the Film Freaks, a film I helped produce with Bill and Kyle, is out there, available. You can order that one. It's a great stocking stuffer, either for this year or for next or for the year after. It's a great movie. I'm glad that my name's on it. I'm glad it didn't come out and I said, ooh, but no, that's not the case. It's a great film. All right, I'm going to try to read out these patrons who have given their time, their money, their love, so that they help the show go. This is in not necessarily any particular order, and hopefully I don't butcher any of these names. Steve Byrne, that's Steve Byrne of the Freep Film Festival, which hopefully is coming back in 2021. Emily Barney, Penciliero, Nick Britt, Jordan Nash, Andrew Hendrickson, Maestro, and hey Maestro, you need to pick which tier you're at. When we changed the tiers, it didn't automatically say if you paid this much, then you get in this tier. You have to pick that out. John Adam, Urban Green, Ellis Kish, John Jenks, Joseph Charlesworth, Todd Martin Cobbler, Mick Brooks, Bjorn Unnar, Bill Ackerman, Brian Tessitore, Judith Main, who is on our episode about Le Corbeau, Jack, just Jack, Victor Laval, Christopher Fitzpatrick, Wayne DeGoldie, Andre Idu, Clinch, Vincenzo Natali, Drew Bateman, Conrad Silas, Journey of an Ascete podcast, which I had the pleasure of being on an episode of that earlier this year, Travis Martin, Grace Morgan Pardo, Winter Tyson, John Redford, Jonathan Melville, Skiz Sizik, R.W. Lovejoy, Patrick Macias, Drew A. Yavor, Tony Hudson, Jason Davis, David Wolf, Chris Martz, Tiago Barbosa de Miranda, Stuart Rankin, Robert Mary, I don't know if that's Robert St. Mary and they just cut out the Saint, Colin Gallagher, Mark Peterson, Jennifer L. Kello, Bram Brunes, sorry Bram, Bobby Power, Dylan Davis, Kenny Siegel, Tom, Mike Bell, Michael Lick, P.T. Ryan, Gabe Weissart, Faisal Azam Qureshi, David Bullock, Lori, Nico Schmidt, Orlan Evanson, Michael Tripiano, Dusty McGowan, Bob Vickers, Tila Wickland, David Bertrand, The After Movie Diner, another fine podcast, Robert Zavrina, sorry Robert, Daniel Dahl, Steve, Jim Stevens. Here's one that I don't think that I can pronounce this. SJIJSKHSISIS. Charles Wood, Eric Peterson, David Springfield, Niklas Grebius, Andreas Muller, Ohad O'Mahony, Kai Clear, Steve Hamilton, Film Lars, Sir Alvin Akarma, David Jodin, Antti Halopainen, Matthew Clark, Myrna, Eric Gilliand, Raul Benavides, Matt Clark, as opposed to Matthew Clark, Mr. X, JC, I don't know if that's Jesus or somebody else, Aima Noabodi, Boots Century, Thomas Ronka, Stewart, Eric Luther, Mark McElligott, Brian Holt, David Hart, Maurice, unless that's Morris, Eric Highgraph, Alan Ricks, Darren Williams, The X-Cast, Mike Crate, Eddie Coulter, Christine King, Brian Rosenberg, Kalsabub, Hortense the Mule-Faced Girl, Jim Laxkowski, William Boodle, Nicholas Kernow, Alistair Montgomery, Jason Kaufman, Hugh Bochard, Paul Simpson, Jerry Kowalski, Kelsey Sorensen, K.L. Young, Monica Sheets, Lutz Bacher, Susan White, my old professor, Chandan Bhatt, Leon McShanag, Nick Barsak, Tenny Manouk, Christian Von Schack, Jared Labine, Michael Sockers. And just make this fully complete. Christian, you need to select your level. Raul, The After Movie Diner, Robert Zverina, Zeverina, Mark Peterson, Jennifer Kello, Robert Mary, and Grace Morgan Pardo. Y'all need to select your levels over on Patreon, so please do that if you haven't done it already. So that way when I select, hey, this episode goes to this person, or this level, this episode goes to this other level, or whatever I'm doing, that way you'll get the things that you have paid for. That's kind of nice, right? Every once in a while you get the stuff that you pay for. Well, I want to thank again those 130 people. I apologize if I butchered any names. Unfortunately, Patreon doesn't have one of those read this phonetically type of thing, which most of the time I'm sure we just fuck around with anyway, right? So here is to a wonderful 2021. Got a lot of things already in the hopper as far as interviews go, things that I'm working on for. There's a bunch of stuff for June that I've already got some interviews in the can. I mean, we're already looking at some things for November of next year. I've even got an interview completed for an episode in December of next year. So we are definitely moving on things. So don't, again, think that I'm ignoring you if you've given a suggestion in the past. I'm also working on those. So there are some things that people have asked for years ago that are still happening. Recently we did the Mick Travis trilogy, which was something that I got suggested probably 6 years ago. So it definitely happens. Though there are other times where interviews just kind of fall in my lap where I say, hey, let me try to get this person. And that's how an episode comes about. So once again, thank you very much, folks. I really appreciate your time, your energy. This podcast has really kept me going through 2020. It's been a shit year. We all know that. But hopefully I've given you a little bit of pleasure. You definitely have given me a lot. So once again, thank you. And hey, keep the shiny side up and the dirty side down.